One of America's first astronauts said it publicly, while he was still alive, to say it. If his crew ever died, people should accept it and keep the program moving. The conquest of space, he argued, was worth the risk of life. In January 1967, the words came due. The man's name was Gus Grissom. He was not the first to go. He was number 4 of 8. This is the story of 8 men who never reached the moon, and of how their deaths shaped the mission that did. July 1969. Neil Armstrong climbs down a ladder, and an estimated 600 million people watch him do it. That is the story everyone knows. Underneath it sits another one. In 1961, President Kennedy promised the moon before the decade was out. What followed was the largest peacetime engineering effort in American history. Around 400,000 people. Spacecraft that did not exist yet. Engines that kept exploding on their test stands. And one strange statistic. Between October 1964 and November 1967, 8 American astronauts and space pilots were killed. 37 months, 8 deaths. Not one of them happened in space. They died over Texas, over Missouri, over Florida and California. 3 of them died sitting on a launch pad, going nowhere at all. And 2 of them died within reach of their own spacecraft. The question is not why spaceflight was dangerous. Everyone knew it was. The question is why the deadliest phase of the moon race was the phase when almost nobody was flying. And what those deaths bought. It starts with a bird. October 31st, 1964. Captain Theodore Freeman is on approach to Ellington Air Force Base near Houston. He is a test pilot and one of the newest astronauts of the American Space Agency, NASA. NASA used a small supersonic jet, the T-38, to keep its astronauts sharp between missions. The astronauts practically lived in them because the program lived everywhere. Factories in St. Louis, the Cape in Florida, training in Houston. The jets were how astronauts commuted. A snow goose hits his canopy. Shards of plexiglass are sucked into the engines. Both flame out. Freeman turns away from the buildings below him. He aims for an open field, then ejects. He is roughly 100 feet above the ground, far too low for a parachute. He was 34, the first astronaut America ever lost. 1. 16 months later, the danger picked a location with a terrible sense of irony. February 28, 1966. Elliot C. and Charles Bassett are the prime crew of Gemini 9. They are flying their T-38 to St. Louis, to the McDonnell plant where their own spacecraft is being built. Rain, snow, fog, visibility collapsing. C circles for another approach and comes in low. The jet clips the roof of Building 101 and slams into the courtyard. Inside that building, at that moment, technicians are working on the Gemini 9 capsule. They died at the very building where the machine that was supposed to carry them into orbit stood waiting. The capsule itself was untouched. It shipped to Cape Kennedy 2 days later, on schedule. An investigation board led by astronaut Alan Shepard ruled pilot error in terrible weather. The backup crew, Tom Stafford and Gene Cernan, flew the mission that June. That is how the system worked. The line simply moved up. Nobody said it out loud, but everyone understood the arithmetic. 2 and 3. Then came the year that nearly broke the program. January 27, 1967. Launchpad 34, Cape Kennedy. Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee are strapped into their Apollo capsule, rehearsing for the first crewed Apollo flight. The rocket is not fueled. On paper, this is one of the safest tests on the schedule, but the cabin is filled with pure oxygen at higher than sea level pressure. NASA had flown pure oxygen since Mercury. It was lighter, simpler, and it had always worked. The hatch opens inwards and needs well over a minute to remove, even in ideal conditions. Miles of wiring run beneath the couches. Nylon netting and Velcro line the walls. Somewhere below Grissom's seat, a spark. In pure, pressurized oxygen, almost everything burns. The fire crossed the cabin in seconds. The crew never had a chance to open that hatch. 4, 5, 6. Grissom had flown Mercury and Gemini. Deke Slayton, the man who assigned the crews, later wrote that Grissom could have been his choice for the first landing. White had made America's first spacewalk. Chaffee was still waiting for his first flight, and here the story turns. Because this death changed everything. Congressional hearings followed. The contractor and NASA itself came under brutal scrutiny. The investigation forced a redesign of the entire spacecraft. A new hatch that opened outward in seconds. Flammable materials stripped out by the hundreds. A safer cabin atmosphere on the launch pad. Fireproof suits. Rewired electronics. The Apollo that flew to the moon was, in a very real sense, built out of that fire. Several Apollo astronauts argued exactly that for the rest of their lives. Without the fire, they said, the same flaws would have surfaced in deep space, where no rescue was possible. 1967 was not finished. October 5th, Clifton Williams is flying a T-38 toward Mobile, Alabama, to visit his dying father. He is a Marine major on the crew that would later fly Apollo 12. A mechanical failure jams the ailerons and sends the jet rolling into an almost vertical dive. Williams ejects, far too fast, far too low. His seat in the rotation passed to Alan Bean, who walked on the moon 2 years later. The Apollo 12 mission patch carries 4 stars, 3 for the men who flew, 1 for Williams, 7. Six weeks after that, November 15th, Major Michael Adams drops away from a B-52 in an X-15 rocket plane. He is not a NASA astronaut. He is an Air Force test pilot. But this flight will carry him above 50 miles, the American definition of space. His experiments that day include a materials test for the Saturn moon rocket itself. Near peak altitude, just over 50 miles up, the aircraft drifts off heading. On the way down, it enters a hypersonic spin. Adams recovers, briefly. Then the flight control system drives the plane into violent, rapid pitching. The X-15 breaks apart under forces above 15 times gravity, enough to make a 200-pound man weigh 1.5 tons. Adams received his astronaut wings after his death. By the American definition, he was the first American ever killed during a spaceflight. 8. Except the story, told like this, has a problem. The word sacrifice suggests intention, and there was none. These were accidents, in a profession where accidents were routine. Test pilots died every year in the 1960s, far from any space program. And historians disagree about the what if. Freeman's crash changed no hardware. Adams flew for the Air Force, not for Apollo. Only the fire shows a clean, documented line from death to redesign. So the claim is not that 8 deaths were necessary. The claim is that the program learned fastest where it failed worst. Pull back far enough, and the pattern gets stranger. 24 men flew from the Earth to the Moon between 1968 and 1972. Every single one came home alive. And all of the dying happened before. On runways, in fog, in a sealed cabin full of oxygen, as if the program had paid its entire price in advance. Alan Bean is reported to have left Williams's astronaut pin on the surface of the Moon, a small piece of metal for a man who never got closer than the Florida woods. The moon landing is usually told as the story of the 2 men on the ladder. Maybe the more honest version counts differently. 12 men walked up there, 8 never got the chance. Grissom asked the world in advance to accept the risk. The harder task is remembering that the risk had names. Thanks for watching.